Hello and welcome to FACT's webinar, Farm Employment Law Basics. Our guest presenter is Chloe Faulkner-Johnson with Farm Commons. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Manager, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that is headquartered in Illinois. We work to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat, and helping consumers make informed food choices. FACT has two program areas, humane farming and safe and healthy foods. I manage FACT's humane farming program, which works with livestock and poultry farmers across the country. Along with my colleagues Katie Mead and Lydia Strand, we offer grants, scholarships, training courses, mentorship, and of course, webinars on a variety of absolutely phenomenal topics. Thanks to our Safe and Healthy Foods program, FACT is at the forefront of national efforts to ensure the health and safety of our food. Safe and Healthy Foods, Steve Roach and Madeline Clevin advocate for strong corporate and government policies, such as ending the overuse of antibiotics on factory farms, banning dangerous veterinary drugs, and requiring factory farms to control foodborne illnesses. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcerns.org to learn more about our farmer services. At this time, I am delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Chloe Faulkner-Johnson. Chloe is a Farm Commons staff attorney. Her work focuses on ensuring farmers and the agricultural community receive sharp legal analysis as she writes newsletters, books, guides, and supports curriculum development. Chloe farmed for many seasons, learning from Neil Taylor near her hometown in Ellenwood, Georgia, Ken Dawson of Maple Springs Farm in Cedar Grove, North Carolina, and Kaylee Morrison of Colorfields Farm in Durham, North Carolina. Chloe earned her bachelor's degree from New College of Florida and went on to study law at the University of Georgia School of Law in Athens, Georgia. She began her legal off-farm career as a public defender, providing legal services for low-income clients, and later developing equity programs for lawyers and court systems with a nonprofit in Raleigh, North Carolina. As an agricultural professional, Chloe has advised farmers through the Brannon Law Firm in Hillsborough, North Carolina on small business information, zoning, and real estate issues. Chloe most recently worked at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, also known as CFSA, as the local food systems manager. At CFSA, she led market access efforts and provided technical assistance for growers on GAP certification and the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is also known as FSMA. Chloe owns land with 4 friends in Cedar Grove, North Carolina, and is slowly turning that raw piece of land into a home site and a place to grow her food and flowers. And for those of you who have heard me talk about North Carolina, Chloe and I are in the same neck of the woods. And actually, she could probably have come and we could have done this webinar together at my place, but we didn't. So anyway, with that, I am going to hand it over to Chloe. Take it away, Chloe.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Let me get this queued up here. So we're here today to talk about employment law basics for farms. And hopefully by the end of our time together today, you're going to understand basic legal issues behind employment law for farms. So we're going to look at classifying employees versus contractors versus interns, minimum wage obligations, overtime, and workers' compensation. I'm going to be mostly talking at you for about 45 minutes of our time together. Hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes at the end to answer some questions. Of course, I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions. This is really just the beginning of a long journey of determining what your employment law obligations are, and how you might need to change the structure of how you hire people. But we are going to get pretty far down that road today. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Farm Commons if you aren't familiar. We are a nonprofit organization, 501c3, and with that we have a mission. Our mission is listed here on the slide. It's to empower agricultural communities to address their own legal vulnerabilities within an ecosystem of support. And we help cultivate and create this ecosystem of support by doing things like we're doing today, hosting this educational programming. We spend a lot of time doing research and then developing plain language educational materials that hopefully make sense to farmers and service providers with whom the farmers work. We've got lots of long form written guides. We have models to some like templates for legal documents that farm businesses need, tutorials. We have workshop series, and all of this together, our goal is to help farmers make the critical decisions about their business that they need to make so they can address any legal vulnerabilities. Leadership development is also a big part of our work. We deeply believe that the farm and ranch community is the best source of solutions for challenges that they face. So we focus on helping farmers and ranchers understand their options within the legal rules. And we also strive to create ways for farmers to define their own solutions and share those with their peers. We have an online platform that's part forum, part Q&A, where members can come to ask questions that I or another attorney on staff answer, and also come to discuss issues that have come up for them and how they've solved those. We have a membership program, and that's really what makes it possible for us to do the work we do today. FACT is what we call an institutional member. We also have producer level memberships, and we're just going to talk a little bit about that at the end of today's session. I do want to say one thing that we don't do, which is we aren't attorneys for hire. We don't provide individual legal services. We are exclusively devoted to educational outreach and leadership development. So we're not earning any revenue by charging for legal services. Instead, we rely on our membership fees, grants, donations, and products development contracts. So we work with nonprofits and other service providers to develop guides that farmers need. All right, you've already heard enough about me. So let's just, I'm going backwards here. Let's just jump on into today's program. So this is a roadmap of what we're going to cover. We're first going to talk about classification. So when we talk about worker classification, we're meaning, is this person who is doing work for me an independent contractor or an employee, an intern or apprentice, or a volunteer? We're going to talk about how we fit people into the correct category. And then we'll move on to what it means if you've determined you actually have employees. What are the legal obligations that you then have to those folks that you've classified as employees? Now, I'm sure all of us have quite a bit of knowledge and experience about employment. You may already employ people. You've probably been somebody else's employee, or you've managed other people. Really think about your past experiences as we talk about what we talk through today, and reflect on the wisdom you already have, and note where what you hear might be different or might support the knowledge you already have. Okay, a key knowledge point for today is that almost everyone who does work on a farm is going to be classified as an employee. This is a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, but the law on this is very clear. And what the implications of this is that farms that treat workers as something other than employees are exposed to risk. Okay, so let's really drive deep down into these classifications so you can really start to suss out who you've got working for you. There are two basic categories of people who work on farms, and that's either going to be an employee or an independent contractor. So we're going to get started with independent contractors. They are often used on farms, either correctly or incorrectly, so it's a great place to start. Generally, independent contractors have to fulfill all of the criteria that you see on this slide. These are general criteria. They come from federal guidance. You all, as I saw in the chat box, are from all different states, and your state may have different or more specific tests, we'll say, that build on these criteria. But if you understand the criteria here on this slide and the intent behind that criteria, you're going to be a good ways along in understanding who is an independent contractor versus an employee. So independent contractors generally bring their own tools to the job. They set their own schedule as for when the job will happen and what hours within which they will do that job. An independent contractor, or a true independent contractor, I should say, controls how the task is accomplished. They aren't waiting from instructions for the person who is paying for their service. A true independent contractor has an opportunity to make a profit on the work that they do. So the revenue that they get from providing the service minus the expenses that they expend ends them up with a profit, right? So you see within that is housed the criteria that usually an independent contractor is responsible for their own expenses. That's why they bring their own tools. They have to pay for that. They maintain their own equipment, that kind of thing. And lastly, an independent contractor provides the same service that they're providing this person to others. So generally, they have multiple people that they're providing services to at once. Okay, that's not the criteria, but they do provide the service to other people. Okay, so we are going to run this through a scenario to try to apply it a little bit. Let's talk about a farmer named May. Suppose she has a row crop operation. And in the fall, she works with a neighbor farmer to harvest her crop. This neighbor has a combine, and this neighbor also does custom harvest for a few other farmers in the region. The neighbor coordinates their schedule as they're able to get to May's farm, depending on what else they've got going on their own farm or with other farmers. And May pays this person in cash. Okay, so what do you guys think? Is this person an independent contractor? Likely, yes. Likely this neighbor that May relies on to harvest their crop is a independent contractor. They have their own combine, so they're bringing their own tools. They set the schedule dependent on when they're available. May's not going to tell the neighbor how to operate their own equipment. And this neighbor, they're not going to make money if they're not efficient. And if they haven't maintained their equipment well, and say it breaks down and that delays them, they can't do some of the jobs, right? So the opportunity to make a profit is within the control of that neighbor. It can be helpful to think about other times in life that you interact with or hire independent contractors. So another likely scenario where you work with an independent contractor is in construction or repair. Say you hire someone to fix your plumbing or build you a shed. In both of these instances, you are hiring an independent contractor. Anything else that's directly connected to the work of the farm business is going to be unlikely to meet this independent contractor criteria. Okay, so back to Farmer May. We've decided she does actually have an independent contractor. What's that mean? Okay, that means she doesn't have to worry about these employment laws that we're going to spend the rest of this hour talking about. You know, it's like when you hire a plumber to fix your pipes at home. You're not going to worry about whether or not you've complied with employment laws when you pay the plumber. You're just going to pay the fee and both of you go on your own way. That's a true independent contractor. On an accounting note, you all have probably heard about the $600 threshold. That's if you do end up paying a true independent contractor, that's $600 or more. That's when you start issuing the 1099 at the end of the year. That is your duty to an independent contractor. As you'll see, your duties to an employee, the list is a bit longer. So most farms are going to need people to milk cows, weed vegetables, get products sold, and the everyday tasks that make up a farm's work. And for the most part, farms are going to need this work done on their schedule to their specifications. So in the end, what we find out is that for the most part, farmers need employees. Okay, so I'm wondering if that criteria for an independent contractor, if that feels familiar, or if the information that you had about that was any different. It's very likely that many of you have had experiences that are different from what the rules are. Either you worked as an independent contractor for years for the same person doing a variety of tasks, or maybe you have independent contractors that you're now considering, this person might actually be an employee. Or of other farms who use independent contractors all the time. So there is going to be this dissonance, right? There are experiences that are different from what the rules are. And why is this? Why, if there are these rules, why are so many people unaware or not following them? A lot of this dissonance comes down to enforcement. So let's consider, how do the rules get enforced in the first place? So often it'll be someone gets let go from their job and they go to the unemployment office to file for unemployment insurance. And then as a part of filing that person's claim, the person who works in the unemployment insurance division is going to start asking questions. They have to figure out if the person that has applied for unemployment was an employee, and did the employer then pay into the unemployment insurance system. So that's a pretty common way for this question to come up for a business. Less commonly, a worker themselves may file a complaint with the IRS that they're misclassified. This doesn't happen that often, but it could, and it can, the trigger of it happening is usually someone gets that 1099 at the end of the year, didn't really realize that they're going to be responsible for their own taxes, get a huge tax bill, $1,000 or more, and then they get upset. So they talk to the Wage and Hour Division or the Department of Labor, maybe file a complaint that way. Another big way that things come to light is when workers get injured, bills need to be paid, and then questions about whether or not that worker was an employee come up. But there are many ways complaints can be brought up, but enforcement is not 100%. The law is one thing and the issue of enforcement is another. So you will see this difference. And Samantha, is there a question?
I was just going to say, you can finish what you were saying, just that Wade in the chat said that he is a custom operator and he's a contractor for seeding, but none of his customers have ever given him a 1099.
Does alternatively, have they've put him on payroll, or
no, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like he just gets
cash,
gets paid,
and is not.
And I'm assuming he then, reports his taxes on his, well, I shouldn't assume, I don't know. Not everybody does that, but understandably. But So I mean, would you, so if you hired Wade, would you be expected to give him a 1099?
If you're paying him more than $600 a year, yes, you are. The rule is that you then issue a 1099 at the end of the year.
Okay, he said he does report on his end to the government, but
Mhm.
good job, Wade.
All right. Okay, so now we've talked about independent contractors. Let's talk about what an employee is. So the law says that to employ someone, it's a kind of a funny definition, is to permit someone to do the work of a for-profit business. So you notice it doesn't say things, it doesn't describe the mechanics of employing. It's not saying you put out a job application, you do an interview, you select them, then you train them to do the work you want to do, and then you pay them on a routine basis. No, the definition of to employ a person here is quite broad. And you may start to get an inkling that this encompasses quite a few more people than you might have first thought. You might even be saying to yourself, okay, well, what about interns and volunteers? This is starting to sound like they may also fall into the category of employees. Let's start with interns. So for a worker to be a legal intern, they also, just like an independent contractor, have to meet certain criteria. So those criteria are, first, they need to be involved in a formal education program. So if you have a college student studying some sort of agricultural leaning coursework, then that criteria can be kind of easy to meet. Then we move on down. During the course of the internship, the intern must receive significant, broadly applicable educational benefits. Okay, so that's starting to get a little harder. Generally, interns learn how to do work on a specific farm because they are asked to work on that farm and are trained for a specific farm. They're not receiving this broadly applicable education from a farmer that they're working with for the summer. The last criteria is that a true legal intern would not displace a current employee. So how do you know if an employee is displaced by an intern? The test for that would be to pretend the intern doesn't show up. Were their tasks so inessential or unessential that you could have done it yourself, or it doesn't matter if they don't get done? Or if they don't show up or they stop showing up, are you going to have to hire someone to get that job done? If you have to hire someone to do it, then you have likely displaced a current employee with that intern. So this test is very hard. If you have a true intern that, okay, so first they're involved in a formal education program, they're probably only going to be available June to August at most. And then you have to spend this time training them broadly. That starts to feel like a waste of time. And then lastly, if you're not suffering when they don't show up, why are you having them come at all? Is this really benefiting you? A person who meets these true intern criteria really aren't going to be very helpful to farms if they're actually meeting them. And that's the law's point. They want people who are doing the work of a for-profit business to be treated as employees and compensated as such. States are also, I mean, I'm going to say this many times today, but states also have different intern criteria. Some states have specific apprenticeship programs that some of them are going to have more stringent criteria. So the list is going to get longer. It's going to be even harder. If there are specific apprenticeship programs, there may be a way that you can work within those to have someone work on your farm that actually doesn't meet the level of employee, but we're not getting into those specific state programs now. There's not many state apprenticeship programs. And for the interns, they're usually just going to be longer than this list and more stringent. So if you know these criteria, you're pretty good along the path of understanding what an intern would be versus an employee. Okay, so now on to volunteers. So for-profit businesses are not eligible to have volunteers. This includes strangers, relatives, or friends. Again, the definition of an employee or to employ someone is doing the work of a for-profit business. Volunteers, the legal definition of volunteers includes people who give their time to charitable nonprofit organizations or governments in order to benefit humanity. Okay, that's the federal definition. So, and if you are a for-profit business, you cannot have a volunteer. So let's look at a few scenarios to help flesh this out. First, Farmer January. January has a CSA operation. Some of our customers prefer to help out on the farm by packing boxes or doing marketing rather than paying cash for their share, their CSA share. This works great for everyone. January appreciates the help, and the customers love doing this. They love being a part of the farm. So January has a program where people can earn a part of or full CSA share through labor. These are very common, these work trade programs. But we do have to know that Farmer January's helpers in this situation, in this program that they've set up, they are likely employees. Farmer January is going to need to consider what her obligations under the law are. But we're going to get to that. We will talk about those obligations in just one moment. Let's go through two more scenarios first. So now we have a farmer named August. He has a dairy operation. He and his brother used to run the dairy operation, but his brother definitely recently left for an off-farm career. So August needs some help, and his sister says, oh, my son can come out and help you. So August has his nephew come over after school for a few hours every day, and it really takes some of the burden off August. But even here, August's nephew is very likely considered or classified as an employee. All right, one last scenario before we get into what that means if you have an employee. Let's think about a U-Pick farm. Okay, so there's a farmer named July. She's been listening to what we have to say about this expansive definition of employee. She has this U-Pick farm, so we all know what that means. She has folks come out, pick her strawberries and blueberries, and she starts to wonder, oh my goodness, are the people that are coming out to the farm and picking their own berries, are they actually my employees? You can't be saying I'm supposed to be paying them for the privilege of picking their own berries, right? What do you guys think? Ponder this for one moment. Okay, so when we think through this, let's consider that legal test for employment. Is this farmer, July, permitting them to do the work of her for-profit business? If you're thinking, no, these folks aren't doing the work of the U-Pick, they're just customers, you are on the right track. So let's drill down into that. In the end, the answer is no. Customers of a U-Pick are not doing the work of a for-profit business, because the work of a U-Pick operation is to set the scene for people to come and pick berries. So the work is growing the berries. The work is providing parking, giving people pails to put the berries in, taking money, advertising the business, maybe giving a little instruction about where to go, how to pick. That is the work of the for-profit business. So you can have customers come to your farm, do work that looks like the work of a farm, but they're just customers. So there are limits to this rule of who an employee is.
Hey, Chloe, before you move
Yes.
out of this whole volunteer idea, there is a question in the chat, not in the chat, in the Q&A that is probably best if you answer it now. Or you can choose not to, it's totally up to you. What about woofers? Are they, do they qualify? How do they qualify? What would they be considered?
So, right, woofers, I've done the program. As far as I understand, you trade work for a place to stay and food. So as we'll talk about in a moment, the question of being classified as an employee versus a volunteer or intern is the first step in the analysis. And the second step is, what does that mean I have to give that employee? The biggest obligation that we're going to consider is minimum wage, right? How much do I have to pay them? How much do I have to pay them? So we'll see that there is some variation in how much an employee has to be paid, or really if there's any minimum wage to pay at all. But so the analysis is always, are they doing the work of a for-profit business? And if they are an employee. And then you have to dig deeper. Where am I? What state am I in? What are the rules for this state? And what are the obligations for each of those employees? So I can't give you like a specific answer because it's so dependent on location. But I'll also go back a little bit to enforcement. So you're going to see once you start learning this information, you're going to see around you all kinds of examples of things that people do on their farms, really innovative programs that are suddenly going to become maybe questionable in your mind. Wait, is that okay? And really the question you should be asking yourself is, are they exposing themselves to risk? Could they be facing some enforcement action from a Department of Labor or, the state corollary to the Department of Labor? And if you have employees and you're not meeting your employment law obligations, it is true that you are at risk potentially of facing these enforcement actions that come with fines, or having to pay back wages if you weren't paying your folks enough, or you had to pay them overtime and you didn't. Okay, so I know it's kind of a roundabout way of answering that. And it may make more sense as we go through some of the employment law obligations. I'll just say the woofing program isn't exempt from these laws. There's just a lot of maybe exceptions, ins and outs. Okay, so let's answer this question. What do we do now if we figure out, oh man, we do have an employee? So this just means employment laws apply, okay? And we have on our website available to members these things that we've spent a lot of time putting together. We call them the Selected Essentials for Farm Employment Law. We have a what would I call it? We just have a guide for each state that covers not only the things you see on this slide, minimum wage through unemployment insurance or payroll obligations, but also things like discrimination, in-kind wages, the independent contractor obligations for each state. And so that is valuable information if you're able to access that. As I kind of just insinuated, employment law is vast. The obligations that you may be incurring if you do have employees can pretty much proliferate. But you need to understand at least these basics to get going. All right. So the first question we're going to ask about employment law obligations is, if I have an employee, do I have to pay at least the minimum wage? The surprising answer is that some farms do have to pay minimum wage and some farms don't. Like I said earlier, it depends on the state where you're located, how large the farm is, and as we'll talk about towards the end, what type of labor you are assigning your workers. But oftentimes this question is moot. You know, in order to attract a qualified workforce or workers at all, you may need to offer it well above the minimum wage, you know, just to get them on board. The federal minimum wage rate is still $7.25 an hour. In many states, that's still what the minimum wage rate is. So that can be too low to even attract workers a lot of times. The people who do need to pay attention to these minimum wage rates are generally those who offer those internship and volunteer programs and might have just learned that, uh-oh, I don't have a true legal intern, or uh-oh, I have volunteers on my farm all the time, but now I just learned they're employees. So you need to start paying attention to specifically or especially this minimum wage obligation. You may not actually owe an intern or volunteer the minimum wage. So let's look at some, I can't go over every state, right? I can't go over all 50, but let's look at a few so you can see the range of, well, just the range in minimum wages and the obligations there, and when it does and doesn't apply, and how many exceptions and kind of twists and turns there are. We'll start with Washington because it's easy. In Washington, farms do have to pay at least the minimum wage to their workers, and it's the same for all businesses. Relatively recently, the state of Washington got rid of their agricultural exemption for farm workers. So all farmers in Washington have to be paid $15.74 an hour. So even if you had someone who was an employee but you called a volunteer, you would need to be paying them if you're in Washington. Illinois, on the other hand, goes in the opposite direction. There's no minimum wage required on Illinois' farms until the farm reaches a certain size. I'm not going to get into this details of this test, but generally that's when you start reaching about 6 or 7 full-time employees. This is based on a federal rule called the 500-man-day rule. Now, 6 to 7 full-time is not like in stone, the definite line in the sand. That's just to give you a general idea of when that might start kicking in. There are other states like Montana that use gross sales thresholds to determine who has to pay a sub-minimum wage rate and who has to pay the regular minimum wage rate. So this is usually states do this to give small businesses a break in their minimum wage requirements. So in Montana, for example, if a business grosses less than $110,000 in sales, then they only have to meet a minimum wage of $4 an hour. Whereas if you gross over that, the minimum wage rate in Montana is $9.95 an hour currently. So, for example, in Montana, you could have someone you call an intern who isn't a legal true intern, but if you pay them what equals out to at least $4 an hour, you also have to be a small business here, gross under that threshold, then you could essentially maintain an internship program. It just won't, it's just they're an employee and you're still meeting your minimum wage obligations. So in many states, there's still flexibility there. Okay, overtime. In most states, overtime is not going to be owed to farm employees unless you assign non-agricultural labor. When overtime is owed, this is time and a half. You have to, pay 1.5 times the wage that you pay normally, and it's usually over 40 hours in a week. Now, there has been some movement across the country, states changing their farm labor laws. Starting, like I said, Washington, they got rid of their agricultural farm worker exception for minimum wage and overtime. So this is going on through a few states, and some states are, stepping in the program over a number of years. So right now, the states that require overtime for farmers at 40 hours a week or just California direct to consumer farmers in Colorado and Hawaii, if the farm has more than 20 employees. So that's pretty limited. Other states that require overtime in certain circumstances are going to be other farms in Colorado, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Washington, and Minnesota. And keep an eye out, because I mean, you'll see this in the news overtime, specifically of states kind of debating this and making some changes in this area. Okay, especially because this is such an important question for whether or not overtime is required, we need to discuss what agricultural labor is. You run a farm, you assign people tasks, you're assuming all of that are farm tasks or agricultural labor. And that's not true. It is dependent on the federal definition of agricultural labor. And once again, states may have their own additions or kind of constraints on the definition of agricultural labor. But first, let's just say generally, the rule for ag labor are things that we normally think about on a farm, you know, maybe traditionally, like harvesting, cultivating, planting. Definitely, you know, field work is solely within, you know, firmly within that definition of agricultural labor. This slide has a typo. This should say, so what is non-agricultural labor? Because the things listed here are actually non-agricultural labor. Agritourism, serving food on a farm, even if you handle products not grown on the farm. So say you buy in some produce to fill out your CSA box. Buying in that produce and handling it in your pack house becomes non-agricultural labor. If a worker works exclusively in a packing shed or only makes deliveries or taking orders to restaurants, if you do value-added processing or product development on farm, all of these things can be non-agricultural labor and changes your employment law obligations. And in Massachusetts, especially, there's been a lot of there's been some activity, and this may change again in the future, but right now all post-harvest activities in Massachusetts are considered non-agricultural labor. But in most states, they follow the federal line between ag labor and non-ag labor.
So Chloe, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So what if you've got somebody who's out in the field and then part of the time, and then they come in and then they pack the rest of the time? So they're not 100% one or the other. How would you deal with those employees when it comes, if you're in one of those states, when it comes to overtime?
That's a great question. So it is true that on many farms, people are going to be assigned both agricultural labor and non-agricultural labor in the same work week, right? And you look at this question, you take a snapshot of each work week. So we're looking at it week by week. And even 1 hour of non-agricultural labor, again, in most states, will kick people over into being eligible for overtime. So if you have an employee who is working over 40 hours in a week, and some of their tasks, you know, even an hour a week, they're doing something that is non-agricultural labor, say they're helping you process some jellies or jams. If they work over 40 hours, they are then eligible for overtime for the number of hours that they work over 40. And that's the federal rule, so that applies everywhere, and states can make a stricter rule if they want. Okay. I believe this is my last substantive slide, so we're going to be able to get to a few more questions. Workers' compensation. So it is more likely in farming than other industries that employees get injuries. I already mentioned how injuries can be an instigator into getting someone to look at the employment situation on a farm. And what the system we have in the US for worker injuries is this workers' compensation program. Many, many farms are exempt from the requirement to purchase workers' compensation for their employees. Again, we have a handful of states to look at and compare. So you start to get a sense of the variety of ways that this can be required or not required across the nation. In Illinois, farms only have to purchase workers' compensation for their employees once they reach a certain size. I know this threshold that's listed is very confusing. There's not even 400 days in a year, much less 3 months, but that goes back to the man day. So it's essentially when you get to a certain number of full-time employees, you're going to have to start worrying about that in Illinois. In Indiana, it's not required. In Iowa, you only have to purchase workers' compensation for your employees once your payroll expenses reach above $2,500. Michigan, 3 full-time employees, and you have to start purchasing workers' compensation. Montana, you must purchase. There are many states when it's not required at all. Farms do get a big benefit when you do purchase workers' compensation, and even in states when workers' compensation is not actually required, you can opt into the program to get that benefit of an employee who gets injured on your farm and takes advantage of a workers' compensation program cannot then sue you for the costs of those injuries. It all gets funneled through workers' compensation. So that's the big benefit, though it is very expensive to purchase this for your employees. Okay, before we get to questions, let me just tell you a little bit more about how you can take advantage of Farm Commons resources. We have a ton of materials. Discovering Resilience, which you see here, is a 5-week workshop series that you can do on demand or participate in some live sessions. So you have a cohort of other farmers that you're working with. One of the 5 sessions is on employment law. We cover also business structures, land matters, diversification and insurance, a lot of good information there. I specifically want to mention, we had a short time together today. I'm going to answer as many questions as I can get to before the hour is up. We also have an advanced employment law course to get a little bit deeper into some of these issues, fleshing out the difference between ag law and non-ag law, all those kinds of things. Also for members who have access to we have so much stuff online, so many guides, and you have that online form, question and answer platform that's available to you. And because FACT is an institutional member, you can take advantage of a discount on the producer membership cost. You can become a member for a year. The traditional cost is $99 for a year. You can get it for $70 with the coupon code FACT30. That's only good through December of this year. So you can take a few months to decide if that's something that could benefit you. But do know that that's available, FACT30. Okay, and with that, I'm ready for any more questions that have come in.
All right, wonderful. And I will send that coupon code out with everything when I send out the recording and all of that kind of stuff. Also, to let you know, the one thing that we do offer are mentorship cohorts. So each year when somebody joins if you end up becoming part of our mentorship program, we do have, I think it's 13 free memberships that with our program, we have 3 we can give away. And we do that just for our mentorship, and we do it first come, first served basis. So think about that. If you're interested, that is one of the many perks of joining our mentorship program. And what I'm going to do while let Chloe take a little bit of a breather and maybe a drink, and then I am going to go ahead and run a quick poll so everybody can sort of gather their thoughts. And let me see where it is, because I'm not sharing my screen. I know it is where I share my screen. There we go. There it is. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes just to answer the questions in the poll, and we'll give that a few minutes to go. And I'm going to go ahead and start asking questions that we have. So somebody asks, I read recently that farms that take credit cards are not, I think she means classified as farms according to the Department of Labor. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, this is super interesting. So this definitely goes to the distinction between agricultural labor and non-agricultural labor. So this goes to whether or not, you can take advantage of the employment law exemptions that are available for farms if certain types of labor are assigned to your workers. Um, I have not seen anything myself in case law, or I haven't seen anything written by the Department of Labor that says credit cards specifically would jump you from one category to another. It does make me think about one thing I didn't mention is that, selling at a farmer's market versus selling at a farm stand at your property. Selling at a farmer's market would be non-agricultural labor. So your Saturday hours at a market, non-agricultural. So I'm thinking that might be the place that most people take credit cards. I don't know. I'd have to see exactly what was written to be able to suss that out. But it would definitely, it goes to that line. And you may be, the states again may have their own division between ag labor and non-ag labor. I know Massachusetts, like I mentioned, is probably the strictest state that I know of about that distinction. But unfortunately, I haven't heard anything specifically about credit cards, so I can't speak directly to that. But it does it just does indicate you need to like really suss out that difference between ag labor and non-ag labor.
Okay, thank you. For payment of volunteer type workers, does it have to be paid as payroll or can it be paid in product?
Oh, wow. This gets us really deep. Okay. Lots of things going on here. So quote unquote volunteers who are actually employees, any employee, if you do have to do payroll taxes for that employee according to your state's laws, then you do have to process them through payroll. There are options it's called in-kind wages to either supplement or substitute an employee's wages with other goods. I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record. I know it depends on the state. Federally, you can provide lodging and boarding, so meals and a place to stay and transportation as in-kind wages. And you can, in my reading of it, can provide product as well. There's so much documentation that has to be done. If you're interested in in-kind wages, we have a guide that's pretty detailed on all the steps you have to take to be able to provide that. But again, it's dependent on what minimum wage, if any, you are required to pay that person in the first place. So do know that there's something called in-kind wages that can help supplement or substitute some wages.
Okay. John asks, what's the minimum age for a farm worker? I did read that right, age. I took it as wage and then I said age, but yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
No problem. Okay, so federally, youths 16 or older can work on any farm at any time. Younger than that, there's a lot of restrictions based on whether the activity they're engaged in is deemed hazardous or not. If it is a farm of their parents, federally, at least, youths of any age may work at any time. Okay, that's just federally. You got to deal with your state as well. And what I would suggest on this specifically, because I mean, this is not only a hot topic, it's pretty sensitive. Call your state, I don't know, sometimes they're called Department of Labor, sometimes they're called something else. All states are going to have probably a pamphlet or multi-page something published about child labor or youth labor, where they have to explain all the rules. And that's really going to be the quickest way for you to fully understand what your obligations are, because states are going to vary there's going to be a lot of variation from the federal rules based on what state you're in.
Okay. Suzanne asks, and this is actually a really good question. Well, they're all really good questions. I didn't mean it like that, but this one in particular is what I'm thinking about. not that I have a goat dairy, but we are a goat dairy. And during the 6 to 8 weeks, when we have lots of kids, we have a volunteer program where families can sign up to help us bottle feed one shift each week. Our staff are always there. And if the families cancel, which is not uncommon, our staff feeds the kids. They are not compensated financially, but certainly gain experience. I know other farms who actually charge for this. Is this okay? So I think that's a great question. And I especially like the part at the end. So if you're doing a volunteer program, if you make it more into a class and people pay to be part of that class, is that one way to get around volunteers? But answer Suzanne's question first. So Suzanne, I didn't mean to piggyback on your question.
No, I mean, I think they are really related. And I wouldn't say having creating an educational experience is a way to get around it. But I definitely, farms can still provide educational experiences, workshops on farm. Like I said, we kind of got in this with the U-Pick example. It's like you can do things that look like farm work, but the person isn't actually doing the work of a for-profit farm. So if you style it as, I would say, it would need to be kind of organized as an educational program. Like Suzanne says, I know farms who charge for this, right? You're charging for the experience. You're giving people a certain experience they are willing to pay for, even if they're not, and they are benefiting from it. So there is a way to create programs like this where it's not people doing the work of a for-profit business. It is people coming to the farm to gain an experience. Whether they pay for it or not, they're still a customer more than they are an employee. So this is really a very fact specific kind of analysis that needs to happen. If you have a program like this and you're worried about whether you're crossing any lines, I can't tell you yes you are or no you're not. That's the time, if you're really worried, that's the time to talk to an employment attorney, maybe a farm law attorney, someone that can tell you, yeah, this is okay, this is not okay. All I can do is give you the general framework and point you in the right direction.
So Chloe, would the key there for Suzanne be that that the volunteers are not taking away the job, a job that an employee could do? Would that be the key to that?
Well, that really is just a criteria for internships. So we don't want to start, that we don't want to, kind of take a test for interns and put it into a test for volunteers, because the law is super, super clear that for-profit businesses can't have volunteers. So you really need to create programs like that in a way that they're not doing the work of a for-profit business. They are gaining experience. Even on the U-Pick farm, those berries need to be picked. I mean, they could rot in the field, right? So that's a pretty blurry line. And if someone has a program, again, all I can really say, if you have a program like that and you're really worried about your legal risks, just talk to an employment attorney and get some assurance there from someone who can really look at your specific situation and tell you about your state laws.
So Dave says his sister lives at his farm and helps him run the farm. What legal obligations do I have to her?
Okay, so is she an owner in the business? Or is she a worker for you? Sisters, there are some federal exemptions for close family members. I can't remember off the top of my head if siblings fall into that, but it doesn't matter because there's going to be state laws that will probably be stricter than the federal law there. So if she is just a worker and not an owner, and she's doing the work of your for-profit business, she's likely an employee, but your analysis can't stop there because you don't, what obligations do you have to her? Does your state allow, is a sister a close enough family relation that the state allows you not to have to pay her minimum wage? And if so, then there's that. But then there's also all the other employment law obligations, workers' compensation, overtime, all those things. So it's again, very fact specific, and you have to kind of look at your state laws.
All right. Robert says, I have a local high school student that would like to work on the farm under school work study. Would they be an employee if I pay them?
Okay, so this is interesting. There is, it sounds like the first criteria of an intern has been satisfied. They're doing some schoolwork study. And again, the test for whether or not they're an employee is not whether you pay them. You can pay an intern. You don't have to let them work for free, even if they do fall into that legal category of a true intern. If you are giving them, there's the first criteria, it looks like we've checked off the second criteria. If you're giving them significant broad-based education about farming during the time that they are there, and they're not displacing someone else that you would, otherwise you would have to hire someone else to do the tasks they're doing, then they're an intern and you have flexibility with how you, or if you compensate them. Then you also, again, want to look at your minimum wage obligations for your state. So you can find out if you have any flexibility in how you compensate them. They might be a minor in your state. You might have some flexibility in how you compensate a minor. But those are things that you need to talk to your, you can talk to the State Department of Labor if you don't mind alerting them to what you might be planning, or do research with our Selected Essentials or some other resource. I will say often, if you Google, like, what's the minimum wage in my state, you're not going to find information about agricultural exemptions or the lack of agricultural exemptions. This isn't farming. Most states don't have a lot of specific information about farms and what they're exempt and not exempt from and employment law obligations. So it can be a little hard to find the information you need without actually talking to someone or using something like our resources like the Selected Essentials, though we don't go into youth labor in our Selected Essentials, unfortunately.
So we've got sort of a similar situation. Our high school FFA kids, or the, sorry, they're not FFA necessarily, but the kids in the animal sciences and the different classes, they're required to do 100 hours. So that's sort of been a problem for us. We always just tell them no, because I know about all this employment law stuff and I'm afraid. But
yeah, I mean, but if there are students that are in a program, you're getting a lot closer to being able to have a real intern,
Okay, good. Maybe I will let them come out then, because I'm going to answer one more question, and it's from Shirley, because I want to be respectful of Chloe's time and everybody out there's time. How do we get people coming out of prison to work on farms? We have one and he worked out well, but having trouble with our parish. She must be in Louisiana or county.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what kind of trouble you're having, but if your question is what obligation could you have them come work on your farm without having to comply with all of your employment law obligations, that answer would be no. If they're employees, you would still have to meet whatever those obligations are in Louisiana for them, unless there's some sort of special reentry program. Though you say you're having trouble with your county, so it sounds like there's not a special program to help you facilitate this. So I can't give a lot of specifics to really flesh that out.
Yeah, sorry about that, Shirley. All right, so we have come to the end. It's hard to believe it's been an hour. I have a few housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available soon. These documents will be archived on our website, and I will email them to you in just a few days. Well, it probably will be tomorrow. Like I said, I have to milk cows this afternoon. So